I have a six-part process that we're going to go through. We're going to talk about bitmap versus vector graphics, Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Photoshop, InDesign. We're going to look at an example InDesign document, and then we're also going to look at how we mocked up our promo supplies. I think by going through this process, it'll explain how everything works and how we're doing this with critical design. So first, I want to jump in here and talk about bitmap versus vector graphics. So there's two different ways you can draw artwork for the most part when it comes to graphic design and business art. So there's pixel based images and there's vector images. So pixels are exactly like this. As you zoom in, you're going to see that it's pixelated because it's basically an image grid with little squares filled in to give the colors that you see when you zoom far away. A vector graphic, on the other hand, is a mathematical equation. These are lines. Each one of these curves has numbers that go with it as far as the X and Y and different factors like that. So you're drawing it with a math equation that when you zoom in, it's infinitely crispy on the edge. It never pixelates because it's not a bitmap image. It's a vector drawing, which is based on like a math equation. So I bring this up because the two programs that you work in the most are Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator. Now I'm going to start with Adobe Illustrator because this is where the process starts, is the logo. So when we had our website redesigned by Launch Dynamic Media, they converted our logo into a vector format. So if we click on these different parts of our logo, they are all just various shapes. If I zoom in, it's never going to get pixelated. So you need this because this logo is going to be used on nearly everything, and it needs to scale infinitely large or small and never lose its crispy edge. So one of the first building blocks of doing commercial business art is to have your logo in a proper format like this. So this is an EPS file. It stands for Encapsulated Postscript, and that is a postscript file, which is just a fancy word for all these lines and drawings that you see are all based on math equations. So Photoshop's the exact opposite. It's bitmap based. So here's a graphic that I recently did for one of our email campaigns, and in the background there's an image. You know, I can turn that off and on. As I zoom in here, you'll see it starts to get pixelated. So Photoshop is great because it lets you do these cool image blends, and I can bring vector graphics in and place them in, and now they'll be bitmapped to the size that I need them to. So Photoshop is probably the first program people learn when they get into graphic design, and then you learn how to draw your logos and do your vector artwork in Illustrator, and then it all comes together in a program called Adobe InDesign. So this is a program where this is Adobe's version of Microsoft Word, but a million times better. This is what most graphic designers are using to lay out multi-page publications. So this particular example only has one page, but this text, I can move this around any certain way. Even within this box, I can get it to move up or down or left or right. You got infinite amount of control, and you can save these as templates. You can pull in vector graphics that are linked to an Adobe Illustrator file. So if I'd update our logo in that file that we were just looking at here, when I hit save, it would automatically update this document. So InDesign's where it all comes together. This is where you put in your text. So the infinite text control, you bring in your pictures, you bring in your images. I could easily put an image in the background, the same one in that graphic, just draw a square and port it in. So that's a good overview of these three programs because these are the three main programs that graphic designers are using. And that's not to say that you can't use Illustrator to do a layout. So the recent layout that I did for our virtual live training, this was actually done in Illustrator because the template that I was using started in Illustrator. And I could go and rework this in InDesign, but for now, I have it in Illustrator, and there's text and there's pictures, and so I can use Illustrator to do this kind of stuff, but far easier to do it within InDesign. So it really depends what your program is of choice. I know some graphic designers that only work within Illustrator, and they can do a lot of cool stuff. But I really feel you need to know all three in order to cover the gamut. If you're doing any type of photo retouching or complex image blends and things like that, you want to do that within Photoshop. So, and everything's layered. So over here, I have different layers. I can turn things off and on. And so once again, these programs are all about control, making sure that things are pixel perfect. And literally, I mean, you can get in here and make it pixel perfect. So you need to shift it up or down one pixel, you can. So That's a good example. So I thinking here, we went through bitmap versus vector, Illustrator, Photoshop, InDesign. We looked at an example working document. Let me show you how I created our promo supplies because this is something we talked about the other day. So let me open up Photoshop, and in here is the chip clip. So what I did is I went on to Google, I found the chip clip image, copied it, brought it into Photoshop, and then I covered up the logo. So I did that by putting a cover up layer. Just cloned a bunch of samples from the previous layer, layered that on top, and now the logo's gone. So what I did from there is I placed the EPS image of our logo in black and white. So I placed it on there, rotated it, made it a little bit smaller to fit on there. And that's literally all I had to do to make this chip clip mockup. Now I could send this to the team as a proof. I could send this to the chip clip vendor so they know exactly what we're looking to do. So this is actually relatively straightforward. Like doing these kind of mockups, this will test basic graphic design skills. And honestly, you don't even really need to do this with some of the vendors because they'll do it on their own. But for the sake of showing it to the team and what it's going to look like, these proofs, these kind of like mock-up proofs work well. So, once again, to go over everything, he starts with your logo in Illustrator, making sure that's vectorized in this vector format. And then you move on to Photoshop and Illustrator or in InDesign. So Photoshop is for your bitmap vector graphics. And then you bring everything into InDesign to place it all together. And if you're doing booklets or multi-page publications, you're going to do that all within here. You can export out to a PDF. You can export out to a JPEG. This is a program where you make print work happen. So I should also mention that InDesign is very much for doing print layouts. Web designers are usually doing things within Photoshop. The templates look much different. And if we want to go down that road, I would have to set up a completely different discussion because web design, up until this point, this is where web design would start to become completely different than print. So as you can see, this is 8.5 by 11 document. This will print out to standard letter size sheet. So very much about print design. And so hopefully this helps. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns. This was fun doing this. And thank you very much.